So, Carolyn, good to be back in conversation with you,
Yes,
and
it is.
I hope you've recovered from the poison ivy episode.
Mostly so. Yes, I
Mhm.
am no longer scratching every moment.
Good, good to hear that. Now, I want to pick up on a theme that I heard coming from you. You'd mentioned in a correspondence before that you'd been in the UK in around Wiltshire around I think 30 years ago. And
Mhm.
you were there for the beginning of the pictograms crop circles. So I
Mhm.
thought the theme of circles and these kind of anomalies coming into our reality will be an interesting topic to explore since you are literally on the ground. So what can you tell us about your time in England around Wiltshire in the early 90s?
Well, I had walked the North Cornwall coast with a friend, and when I came off the walk, I went uh, went to take a bus to Wiltshire to visit Mary Scott, a wonderful author and explorer of these same kind of issues that we are exploring. And she lived in Wiltshire. And as I got onto the bus, I grabbed a newspaper that was, uh, on the newspaper stand right by the door of the bus. And on the cover of that newspaper, the front page had a picture of what they were calling a pictogram, which had appeared the night before. So, of course, I grabbed the newspaper, read it while I was traveling to Wiltshire, and discovered that this had appeared in a tiny little village called Alton Barnes, which was, I don't know, two villages over from where Mary Scott happened to live. And I thought, wow, there are no accidents in this world. I was meant to be here and meant to be here today. So, and it was there had been crop circles of various sorts and arrangements of circles that had been appearing for a couple of years, but this was the first one that was huge and multiple circles and arranged in a whole new design that had never appeared on the planet before. And it was indeed where I happened to be going. So, that wonderful feeling of synchronicity, which I love to live by, was very operative that day. And when I got to Alton Barnes and to Mary's, we went the next day to see it, of course. And it was so exciting, so incredibly exciting. And this had already, even though it was less than 24 hours old, had already gotten people coming to see it. So I was not alone in this enormous pictogram. Um, People from all over England showed up. And it was indeed a huge monument on the ground in the wheat field. Unbelievable. Talking to the farmers, they said, well, we went to bed last night and the wheat field was just the wheat field. Woke up in the morning and there was this huge design um, created within it by wheat stalks having been bent but not broken in this very complex design that you see here. Um, so it was a phenomenon new in the history of the world, really, or certainly from any history that I knew. And people were arriving and arriving and arriving, and we were all excited out of our pants. And helicopters were flying overhead, military helicopters, uh, for their own reasons. So it was a historic moment, really, and how and why I happened to be right there, right then, I will never know. Except I ended up writing the first book about them in the United States. And it's not a big book. There's a copy of it. It's a little tiny pocket book with all the information that I had to offer to introduce it basically to America. And so that's my whole story. And then ever since then, of course, I've gone back. I've seen more, and there was also a huge one that appeared in California, not far from where I live, on a small farm. And we went out on that first day after it was announced. And it was in the same basic design of the one that I had seen in Wiltshire. Who can understand if there's any significance of that or not? But there it was, close to home, the same phenomenon. And again, and that was a few years later. And again, nobody believed it. You know, it was clearly made by a couple of kids who were having a lark in the evening. And what happened, it was very discouraging. I hadn't realized until then the extent to which the story was really being repressed in the halls of government. And that, you know, that I don't know if any of the listeners remember Doug and Dave, two old fellas, British guys who claimed to have dreamed it up one night in a pub and then demonstrated how they did it, which was, of course, ridiculous. But it was an easy way to get out of the issue of, oh my God, are things happening that we cannot explain? And what is sort of astonishing to me now, which is what, how many years later? At least 30 years later, that the subject has simply gone underground. It's, yeah, two guys did it. And people are content with letting that be. And I'm fascinated and horrified because magic is happening around us and we are very carefully avoiding it. And that magic, as I see it, leads to or is an exemplar of a whole other way of perceiving the world, a whole other consciousness, which we have to get there or it's curtains. And there's, you know, there are campaigns to not let us get there. So that's where I'm coming from.
Well, Colleen, I'm aware that you wrote several books because I'm the recipient of a few of them, but I didn't know you'd written a short book on crop circles. So that is a new piece of information for me. But yes, I think we did mention before that there's these two guys, Doug and Dave, or, you know, Bill and Ted. Could be Bill and Ted, you know, in some kind of, you know, great historical adventure. That, yes, the British newspapers.
Please, Carolyn. I mean, why not?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same kind of absurdity, you know,
Yeah.
that these two old geezers, as we say in Britain, you know, would take planks of wood on string and swing them around and have these huge geometric shapes. So, but it's that case of kind of I think this idea of like closing it down very quickly or closing it down in an effective way, because the human mind tends to want closure. And you see, when it comes to these huge patterns on the ground, it's not like other, like the UFO phenomena where you can kind of like, it's not in the public eye, so you can make these stories up and that. But when it's in your face on the field, you know, the authorities wanted to kind of like take control of the narrative very quickly. So this idea of, oh, it's just a trickster, closed it down for many people and gave a kind of resolution in their mind. But this notion of, you know, it's kind of absurd to think that these such intricate patterns were done by planks in the middle of the night when, you know, in the dark with no footprints. But of course, at the other side of it, a lot of people would say, well, it's also beyond our capacity to comprehend that there's this communication going on, this perhaps interdimensional communication with other intelligent beings, because, you know, the idea that something materializes in this reality, creates it and disappears, also brings up the idea of, you know, interdimensional communication. So again, I think it's perhaps too much for the average newspaper reader, and so it was very quickly accepted to close it down. So I mean, do you have any hypotheses about it? Do you feel that there is this interdimensional communication, or, you know, what's going on here?
Well, I don't know what is going on, but there's absolutely more to this world than we understand. And yes, I think we are being communicated with. By whom or what, I can't say, but that it's of another order than our own understandings, three-dimensional understandings of the world, that's absolute. And I, it is antithetical to our notion of science. And so scientists don't know what to do with it. And I think there's a kind of recognition, conscious or not, that if you do accept this, it changes everything. And are we prepared to do that? Either individually or as a culture. Can we say, oops, we've been wrong, or we've been inadequate, or it's more to the world than we know? In which case, everybody with a stake in the way the world is going now, anyone who's part of this economy, who's part of this intellectual map, is going to say, no, can't be, because what do you do now? And when I look at the scientists who fascinate me because I've got so many in my family, I realize that their lives are on the line. If that's real, then what does that mean about what it is that they are doing and teaching and exploring? Does it mean that they've been wrong all along? Does it mean that they lose their jobs? Does it mean that they lose credence in their communities, that they're made a laughing stock? What does it mean for them? Totally destabilizing. So I get it. But, the larger scene is on the line right now. We are self-destructing. And I believe that we are, I'm just rambling all over the place here, but I believe that we don't have to self-destruct. And we're self-destructing partly because the belief system that we hold to is inadequate. And that these are showing us a way of enlarging it and complexifying it. And we're terrified because what it means is that we've got to change. And we humans aren't very pleased with that. So we're stuck in that particular dilemma now, which is fascinating to me. And it's very, very poignant. Because I know what it's like to be afraid. And they're afraid. We collectively are afraid. And we're afraid with a reason. So where do you take that?
Yeah. I think that's perhaps a central point of all this kind of paranormal phenomena or fringe phenomena, is that it's trying to create a crack in the consensus narrative. Mm-hmm. Is that our notion of what existence is, what our reality is, we participate in this collective consensus narrative or collective delusion, if you like, but there are vested interests that want to maintain it because this physical paradigm has a control power structure, and they don't want these other kind of potentials to come in, such as other intelligences. There's basically the whole edifice, as you say, of science or the kind of the entrapment of the human worldview. It crumbles when you allow these anomalies in. And I think all phenomena, especially the UFO phenomenon, I think combined with crop circles, is because many people are they're pointing at it and saying, "Whoa, let's talk to the extraterrestrials, etc." Well, that may not be the point. The point may be these are nudges into the human psyche to get us to understand that there are other realms beyond the ken of human perception. Mm-hmm. And once we start to crack open that, then we can perhaps start to begin an expansion of the human evolutionary journey. But if we're contained in this egg shell, this reality bubble, this perceptual prison, as it's being called, if we're contained in that, then we're not going to evolve on the next stage, because we're just like paddling water, doggy paddlers they call it. We're not going anywhere. So I think perhaps these are interventions to communicate, yes, and also to nudge us further awake. And so it may not be, it may not be just a message, but the whole phenomena is the message, whatever's written in it. The transmission is the message, saying, hey, there's something more going on beyond your reality than you've been conditioned to accept. But yeah, I think you're right. People are scared because, well, may not, I mean, certain people may be scared. I think the authorities are scared that they want to lose control. I think also it's just a lot of people aren't prepared to entertain these notions yet. And that's perhaps why this paranormal phenomena, has been unfolding for decades. It's a gradual preparation of the human mindset. Because if it happened immediately, it would like blow a fuse. Imagine this happened in the 1940s, 1950s, it would just, there was no cultural preparation. So my question is, do you think that we are culturally prepared now after this long exposure, after a lot of cultural social memes through sci-fi's been looking at these ideas, and entertainment industry has looked at these ideas, and we've been exposed to them for decades? Do you think now perhaps we are culturally, psychologically prepared to accept these new interventions?
Well, it's a good question, and I don't know. What I am observing, however, is that some of us are and some of us are not. That's becoming a real split. And this whole phenomenon of children on a spectrum. What does that mean? Who are they? What are they capable of knowing? But there's also sci-fi has become more and more a very popular form of entertainment. And there's also Halloween, so we're not, it's the children that I'm watching. It's not nowhere. But I think that those for whom this way of thinking, or a new way of thinking, comes naturally, and those who resist it at all costs, I think it's becoming clearer who is in which camp, and that the camps have been forming. And what I am keeping my eyes on are the young ones, the brilliant, incredible young people in the art world, in the science world, in the technology world, who were born somehow wired in such a way that they not only perceive the change, but they need the change. So what I'm watching these days, it would seem totally irrelevant, but I think it's not irrelevant, is, I don't know, well, I think I've mentioned it before, the musical geniuses on Broadway in the United States, who are creating things like Hamilton. The story basically looking at the American Revolution in a very different way than our history books do, through the personality of Alexander Hamilton. The genius of the people doing that is another level of intelligence than I have ever seen before. And the level of their energy, I mean, how much they are able to accomplish. It just blows my mind away. And then I watch the young children, and some of them, those imaginations are off the charts. So they're the cutting edge, I believe. They have to grow up. And some of them are now young people, younger than me, but also younger than you. And they are pushing the envelope in directions that I'm very happy to see that they are, but also directions that I could never have imagined. So I was always kind of on the edge, but I'm now not on that edge anymore. I'm now more in the middle. So I know it's happening. Will it happen for me to see in this lifetime? Well, I don't know, except in this lifetime have appeared the crop circles.
Mhm.
And what I am trying to do while I'm still on the planet and uh, have the strength and imagination to do it is I want to bring the crop circles back. In the, you know, they are happening themselves, but I want to bring attention to them back. And I've got a plan, since I now live in a very interesting small town on the East Coast. I am going to show a movie about crop circles that a friend of mine made 30 years ago. And I'm going to call it a birthday party and invite everybody I know in town to my birthday party and show this movie about the crop circles. Because the young people now are too young to remember when we went through all of this hocus pocus, whatever it was, 30 years ago.
Mhm.
And they don't know, you know, I ask people around here what they think of the crop circles, and many of them have never heard of them.
Oh.
So, okay, it's time to make people hear about them. And you may be right, it may not have been time, in fact, then. But the crop circles have never stopped appearing. They're showing up every year all over the world. And we are ignoring them all over the world. So I'm glad to hear you say that it actually serves a purpose, that it didn't sort of burst on the scene and then change society radically, and nobody knew what to do, and we all became kind of like rats in a maze.
Mhm. Well, I
And
mean, I think I would say it serves a purpose because any phenomena really serves a purpose. But of course, we can't say for sure. But of this magnitude, of these ongoing crop circles and the intelligence behind that, of course, there has to be, I would say, a purpose. And if they're intelligent enough to create these elaborate designs through a certain kind of energy interface, because obviously they don't come down and bend them, there's this energy involved, then I think they're going to be intelligent enough to realize that exposure to this type of non-human intelligence or these non-human potentials also takes time for the human psyche. So, you know, I'm sure they realize that it's not going to be an overnight kind of kind of phenomena. And so they've kind of put these out there and continue to put them out there because, you know, humanity is a bit of a slow species. We need time to kind of, as you say, process this. And it's interesting because a lot of these came out pre-internet, because, you know, they were coming out early 90s and the internet really was just taking off. I think it was around 1994 that the World Wide Web, WW, was set up, you know, out of CERN by the English engineer. And so really it only took on at the end of the 90s. So there's this kind of gap whereby a lot of, as you say, a lot of young people probably missed this, because although there's memes and a lot of websites and a lot of information online, if you weren't there initially to pick it up, you know, there's a lot of people going on to chat forums and going on to social media, but they may have missed this kind of first wave of the phenomena. So maybe this re-exposure to it, especially now when the other paranormal subjects are coming up quite strongly. Because again, you know, we've had a lot of movies and films in the last few decades which are really pushing paranormal subjects to the fore. Especially now in the last 20 years, there's been a lot of movies about humans with, you know, extra sensory capacities. You know, they call them mutants in an odd, strange way. But all evolutionary change is a mutation anyway. So I think there's a lot coming in, and also I think there's, you know, maybe going off topic, but I think things like movies and the culture industry, they're being played by both sides. You know, I think there's subliminals putting on maybe a darker side to try and condition people. But I think there's other things coming in, you know, other things like, you know, in the belly of the beast to educate people, which also seeds, you know, creative ideas. So, yeah, I mean, the movie Matrix comes to mind because before that movie came out, people weren't considering so much this angle perspective. Although it had a dark side of the machines, it made people question the notion of reality in a way
Right.
that probably weren't questioned before. So the crop circles and a re-engagement to primarily is for people to question the notion of their reality, isn't it?
Yeah. And one of the things that has been happening also is that the subject of synchronicity has now moved from fringe to center stage, which is very exciting to me. I also wrote a book about synchronicity 30 years ago. Just because I have these personal experiences and I'm sort of built that way. So I'm watching synchronicity very closely as well. Because now there's a whole new sort of movement created by an MD, a psychiatrist, I think, and gathering people around and hearing their stories. And I poked my nose in to see the level of their stories. And it was still very, very beginning stuff compared to my own experiences over the last 50 years of, real magic happening on a pretty much daily basis for me. That was considered really odd then, but more and more people are having, can you believe it? I thought of so and she phoned today, and I go, good work, okay, now let it spread and become a part of how you run your life. And so, since I've been this way since a child, I use it as part of my life force and depend upon it. The it being that the magic is going to happen if I just give it a little bit of time. And then it does. And everything I need walks in the door. And it's sort of unbelievable, except it's been happening to me pretty much all my life, so I believe it. And I have been wondering all my life, what is the force that makes that happen?
I was going to ask you that. What do you think is operating behind synchronicity?
Well, in my own language, I think it's multidimensionality. We exist on multi-dimensions simultaneously, but we live in a culture that doesn't acknowledge that or recognize that. So we think of ourselves as three-dimensional beings in a three-dimensional world, but that's only one layer of the dimensions that we exist in. We're actually much more subtle than that, and there's a lot more going on, just as there's a lot more going on in the world itself. The way the universe operates is not the way we describe it, and not the way a three-dimensional science can even begin to describe it. So, I was talking with a friend yesterday about chaos theory, and I found myself arguing, saying, what's chaos? I don't believe in it. There is no such thing. The universe is a lot of stuff happening at once in multi-dimensions, and it's all conscious. That's not chaotic. It's actually quite ordered in its own way. So that kind of thinking is still not acceptable out there or scientifically. And it's a different language. I mean, it's even three-dimensionality is built into our languages. The languages that are spoken in today's world. They are referring to a three-dimensional world. And that's fine for the part of the world that is three-dimensional, but it's sitting on top of something much more complex. And that is what defines it ultimately. So how do we talk about this stuff when we don't even have language for it? And when not everybody has that quality of experience. But what is exciting to me is that the new ones, the people being born now, the people who are in their teens now, many of whom are considered on the spectrum, whatever that means.
Whatever that means.
Yeah. They carry it. And they are living in a world that is not, in a social world that is not ready to carry it. And so they are considered really off. And so they are, in fact, because they don't fit into the puzzle. So we're in the middle of the creation of a jigsaw puzzle. Is when I had that thought for the first time right this minute. But that's what's happening, I think.
Yeah. Interesting you say about how language, because obviously the language that we kind of absorbed from our upbringing kind of also creates our perceptive reality, because the language frames the way we think, and then the way we think frames our perception. So it wouldn't surprise me if people start talking about these kind of synchronicities. There'll be a kind of cultural censorship, crack down on synchronicity language. It's not woke enough. Another way to get people away from these unfolding conversations and back into the main narrative. But yes, I mean, synchronicity, of course, it was, I think, first really brought to the public mind attention with, Jung's work in the middle of the 20th century. And Jung was talking about synchronicity, but people, because it was a kind of, because it stayed in psychology or depth psychology and Jungian work, it was seen as academic and therefore not really kind of imbuing and melting into the kind of main consciousness. But I think synchronicity, as you say, works all the time, and people perhaps are not as aware about it, as they could be. As you say, synchronicity could be just thinking, now I'm going to see this person today, I'm going to bump into them, and you do. And I think synchronicity is also showing the operation of other psychic faculties, and that we do have a connection, a correspondence, a communication beyond the physical senses, and synchronicity is a kind of manifestation of that. And if we're aware of it, then I think we'll spot it more and more. And then the more you spot it, the more it'll come into our reality set. That's how it works. So I mean, have there been any really major experiences that I mean, obviously synchronicities happen all the time, but you said you've been living with them for a long time, most of your life. Anything that happened that really kind of went, wow, that's a good indication?
Oh, many. I mean, almost on a daily basis. But this one is one of my favorites, and it has to do with it's a long story, and it happens over distance and over time. But we were going to India, and in India, I'm a flute player, and I had heard a recording of a bass bamboo flute, and it was the most gorgeous sound I had ever heard in my life. So I decided I want to study that when I'm in India. And once there, I asked the local instrument maker if I could buy a bass bamboo flute from him. And he said, well, that doesn't exist. And I said, I'm sure it exists. I've heard a recording of it. I know it exists. He'd never heard of it. He made me a set of flutes to show me the largest, how large they got. And it was, this big. And the bass bamboo flute is this big. So I said, no, there's something else. No, it doesn't exist. Sorry, lady. Well, 2 months later, I was in Delhi, and I heard the bass bamboo flute somewhere, and followed the sound. It was actually very funny. My husband and I running through the alleys of Old Delhi, and we find a little concert happening in somebody's backyard, essentially. And there is a young man playing the bass bamboo flute. So, of course, I was all excited. I went up to meet him, asked if he could teach me and get me a flute. And we became very close. And by the time Herb and I left India, he and I had become sister and brother. Well, a year later, he was having a very hard time in India, making a living because of family reasons. He didn't want him to be a musician. And he said, I've got to get out of here. How do I get to America? Well, I had no idea how to bring him to America. I'm getting to the synchronicity over synchronicity. So about a year later, I had an opportunity and an idea to put a recording that I had of his on the radio. I knew somebody working at one of the stations, and they said, "Oh my goodness," and here we're getting into the string of synchronicity. "Oh my goodness, our 11 o'clock show never came in today. Could you get right down to the station?" I said, "Sure." Went down to the station with the reel-to-reel tape, and they said, "Well, announce him. Tell us about this musician." So I made a little speech about who he was and where he was and how he wanted to come to this country. And then we played the music. Turned out that that morning, or the night before, there had been a meeting of the board of the Ali Akbar College of Music, which was in the San Francisco Bay Area where I lived at the time. And I hope this is okay to go this, but this is the way it worked. And they had decided to look for a teacher of bass bamboo flute. He was charged with the job of searching out such a person. It was a very rare instrument that played at the time. And he said, "I never listened to the radio at 11 o'clock in the morning on a Wednesday, but something made me turn on the radio. And there were you and this Indian flutist." And I had left my phone number as well, just in case such a person was actually hearing me. So he called me and said, "Who is he? He's great. He's the real thing." Well, yeah, he's the real thing. "Can we bring him here for the beginning of the school term, which is in 2 weeks?" I said, "I have no idea, but let's try." And the short story of the long story was 2 weeks later, Herb and I went and picked him up at the San Francisco airport, scared out of his wits, like what had just happened to him. And he then became a very famous Buddhist all over the world and lived in essentially our neighborhood. And so the sister-brother bond that we had created in India continued until his death 2 years ago.
That's a great story, and I don't know if it's got cold in my room, but I just my hair just prickled up listening to that story. So I think perhaps because it's magical, and as you say, we don't give the credit to how much life is magical. There's so much operating behind it, and that idea that just a small act, like you search in the streets of Delhi for this sound, and then happen to mention it on the radio, these small acts can have a huge consequence, like you change a person's life, and I think actually going back to it, that's what chaos theory is. Chaos theory, to use their terms, because obviously it's based on that idea that a butterfly flaps its wings and you get a avalanche in the Himalayas. It's based on Lorenz's theory of this weather patterns. It's the idea that life or phenomena within life is non-linear. You see, and people can't perceive that, so they call it chaos, because we are programmed to have a linear view of connections. So really what you've just done is that you've combined chaos theory and synchronicity in one story, and I think that underlies the kind of unified field of magic on which physical phenomena is a manifestation is based on.
Yes. Mm-hmm. By the way, for anybody listening to this who's interesting, that was G.S. Sachdev. Many of you, I'm sure, know his music. Mm-hmm. And he's no longer amongst us, but his music is.
Right. And for anyone else listening, we don't script our talk. We just completely kind of just go with it. And so it's good to have these kind of spontaneous and serendipitous stories. And so yeah, I think it all ties into this magic of life, which again, if there's any chaos, it's, for me, the chaos is when it's artificially constructed, exterior to the world. These internal non-linear connections are not chaos. They're these flows of life that go, in many different directions. And as you said, perhaps we just haven't been wired up to comprehend to a sufficient degree how these non-linear interconnections are the underlying framework of life,
Mm-hmm.
because we're just being conditioned to see exterior physicality and not the underlying energetic correspondences.
And the times are changing. We've got to go, we've got to dig. And we've got to not so much dig as to allow that more subtle stuff to become part of our lives, because it's there. It's just there for the reaching for. And we ignore it. And we ignore it at our peril, I believe. So we've tied ourselves in knots that are totally unnecessary. So actually, I recently, I'm just remembering, I live in this quite remarkable place at the bottom of a village in a tiny village in Vermont. And because everything is just a walk away, I don't need a car. So how did I find, and this is a hard place to find a place to live, how did I find the perfect place? And everybody I know around here says, how did you do that? And I have no idea how I did it. I just kind of showed up, even though everybody said, you will not find a place to live in Putney, Vermont. I said, I think I will. And I found perfect setting for me. You know, everything I need, and within walking distance. I don't need a car. So that, you know, that sort of thing and that way of living, I think that's what I'm trying to say. That sort of relaxing into the moment that you're in and saying, well, I don't know how it's going to happen, but it will. You know, everything I need will appear in my hand. The person I need to meet will be at the co-op when I'm there, and I'll be introduced by somebody else who happens in those places. You know, that sort of thing I live by, and live by successfully, which is a wonderful, it's like getting presents every day. And I never know what those gifts are going to look like, or sometimes I don't even know what I need, but it comes into my sphere, and it's exactly what I need. And then I just say, I don't know how we got this, but thank you. And I don't think I'm in any way special. You know, I don't think I have any particular intelligence. But what I do have is a kind of willingness to open to the illogical. And
a receptivity.
It's a receptivity.
Yeah, and that's a form of intelligence, because, you know, the intellect can close things down because it wants to categorize things. Whereas, you know, like Setsuna, how I call my Japanese friend, Setsuna said, it's not wise to be clever. Because intellect and cleverness, the intellect tries to kind of categorize things, and it can close things down because it wants to nail it. You know, the intellect wants to, you know, get something. So it's kind of trying to be precise and very anal, to use that kind of Freudian language. But the intelligence, if it sits back and be receptive, I mean, that's what intuition is about, isn't it? And receiving nudges. Synchronicities, we could be aligned with, you know, receiving inner nudges, which we could listen to. Interesting, I was some time ago, I came across a psychologist who was talking about these what luck. Sometimes we call it luck, and he was saying that, for example, you roll a dice, and someone says, "Guess what number comes up on the dice," and the psychologist says that actually more people than not guess it right, but you don't want to believe in it, so the intellect comes in and chooses another number. You know, how many times we had that thought, well, I knew it. Why did I say the first thing that came in my head? You know, we often have that. We kind of we reject the first thing that comes as a kind of interior nudge, and then we accept something, the second question, the second answer. It's because apparently the psychologist said there's a filter that somehow our ego doesn't want to accept to be right so many times, because then our personality will say, whoa, what's going on? Am I psychic? So this kind of inbuilt filter kicks in to make sure that we do get it wrong. So we stay within this kind of normalized paradigm of, these weird things don't happen, because imagine if everyone had the correct answer every time. So I think also we kind of cut off our own capacities, because some part of our personality has a fear that if we get it right every time, like something spook is going on. So we may kind of self control or guard ourselves or self censor ourselves.
Yes, and we're not wrong in being a little uncomfortable with that, because it's not fun to be, to have people sort of look at you out of the sides of their eyes and say, "Oh, she's witchy," or "Oh, something about him." That happens, and you sort of have to be willing to walk right past it. Ruff, ruff, ruff.
Yeah, we just had a thunderstorm here, so my little dog is going crazy with the thunderstorm. Poor guy.
Oh, poor thing. So yeah, it's not really the best thing to be the one outside the crowd.
Mhm.
And I've always been that way. It's not that I'm used to it, but I think in my old age, I'm finally getting not only comfortable with it, but realize that what I have to offer and what experience is natural to me is actually a very important one. And what I'm interested in is the evolution of consciousness. And so I'm doing it in various ways in my own life. And that here we are coming to a crux of, do we survive as a species or do we not survive? And it's that serious. And it's so obvious to me that we have to evolve in this direction.
So yes, Carolyn, obviously you're saying that for you, it's all about consciousness, and the evolution of consciousness is imperative. And perhaps that's why there's so many of these conversations going on now about human capacities, paranormal phenomena. And so we've talked about these kind of nudges coming into us. Perhaps this is, my sense is that it's really accelerating. There's more and more of this. So whether perhaps it's both. I mean, perhaps it's because more is happening, and at the same time we're more aware of these things happening.
Mm-hmm.
So is that do you feel that's the case as well? And do you feel that that's happening around this time right now?
Yes. And because everything is so multidimensional, other things are happening too. So, I'm so focused these days on these young geniuses who are taking the theater world by storm, here in this country at least. But I think it must be happening all over the world in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
That the level of brilliance and the depth that they are reaching through popular art forms, taking popular art forms that, like, for example, Broadway Theatre in this country is so often just silly. It's cutesy pie and doesn't go anywhere. It's just sort of pretty. And they're making it a profound experience. And people are responding to the profundity of the experience.
Mm-hmm.
So it's profound excellence that appeals to the general public deeply. That's what I'm seeing. And it's not that it's never been there before, but it's never been so popular in my experience before. So I see that it's significant. It reminds me of another story, which may be relevant. I think it's relevant to this. And it also happened in England. And it also happened around Mary Scott. So I was staying She lives in a tiny little village near Alton Barnes. And I was staying at a pub in the next village over. And when I came back to the pub one evening after spending a day with her, the whole, all the farmers were there and the whole village was in the pub, as they are at the end of the day. And I was this American lady. They don't get American ladies in their pub very often. So, and they were playing darts. So I was invited to be on one darts team. Well, I've never played darts before in my life. And, but of course I was willing to play, and I was handed a dart. I was shown how to hold it and how to throw it. And I did, and hit a total bullseye. I mean, a perfect bullseye. And of course, the whole pub went up in an uproar, and everybody wanted to buy me a drink and carry me on their shoulders. It had never happened before. I'd learned the next day that it was the first bullseye that had been thrown in that pub ever. I was an outsider and an old lady. I mean, I wasn't old then at the time. But that, and then what happened was that there was this great uproar in the pub. The telephone rang in the kitchen, and the publican went to answer it, and it was Mary Scott calling me to tell me to get to bed. She said, you've had a big day here. You need quiet now. I said, wait a minute, you're a mile away. How do you know what's going on here? She said, don't ask how I know, get to bed. So I love that story. And I just threw the dart and it hit right in the center of the bullseye. What I put together with that was, in the course of that day with Mary Scott, I was cleaned out. I don't know how we got to it, but we dealt with stuff, psychological, emotional stuff. And it had to do with my father and one thing and another. I was cleared. And I tried many times to remember what it felt like to be me at the moment that I threw that dart. And it was easy. I wasn't thinking. I was just part of a game. And they said, throw the dart, I threw the dart, without any complication around it. And something then worked to make that dart go right into the bullseye. So I think about that frequently in terms of how do we live in such a way that this magic happens. And as cultures, as Western cultures, we think too much. We're always figuring stuff out, and we don't need to. And in some ways, we do better when we can let go of all of that figuring.
Yeah. I mean, you said the phrase, I wonder what allowed kind of me to do that with a dart, to get a bullseye. And as a guy who grew up throwing darts in pubs, I know how difficult it is to get a bullseye. I would say, actually, it's not what allowed you to get the bullseye, it's what didn't block you to get the bullseye.
Yeah.
Because as we've just been talking about before, about with rolling the dice and that, we have a kind of inner sensor that blocks us,
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we hear these stories about people who say, I was in the zone, I was in the flow,
Right.
Because we unblock ourselves. And I think that's perhaps a way to phrase it, is that to get into the magic of life and to get into the synchronicities and the serendipities, is that we have to unblock. We have to be more receptive, more allowing, because the cultures that we live in, I don't mean any specific culture, I just mean the physicality of life, is quite, especially these days, is overwhelming. And it's just throwing stuff on us, throwing distractions, throwing, this and that, and our attention is going everywhere. And, now they're calling attention deficit, all these things. We're having, of course, the pharmaceutical industry is throwing stuff at us. The food industry has gone downhill. So we've been overwhelmed, and I think all it is that we've been kind of blocked and censored away from the magic. So paranormal phenomena, to go back to that theme, is a way of trying to, strip away all these cultural extras and say, look, just look out the window in a different direction, and there's something else going on. But you've been captivated by the magician pulling out the white rabbit, and you can't see what's going on, elsewhere. And I think we have to declutter ourselves, and maybe these fringe phenomena, and then you've rightly experienced it, start to come into our life, start to flow more when we get in the zone, and then perhaps we are more prepared to open up to communications, not only amongst ourselves, which is lacking, but amongst other forms of intelligences.
Yeah, it's magic, but it's also ordinary. It's magic, and it's magic that I walk on two legs and breathe air. That's incredible. So we live in a magic stream. I don't know. I don't have any other words for it.
If anyone can hear that growling, it's my little Pampy, my little dog.
Oh, I didn't hear him.
He was growling. Yeah, and people may be wondering, anyone watching the video may be wondering why my hand's going back and forth. I feel like a James Bond villain stroking the furry animal, James Bond, I'll get you this time, and then stroking.
What you have to do is just lift his head every once in a while so we can
every once in a while to make sure he's still there. There you are.
Hello.
Yeah. So I think that's sort of part of it. And going back to these cultural events, I mean, I just this week I've been watching some online concerts of one from a Polish musician and one from an Icelandic musician, very young people, and absolutely talented. And when I'm watching them, I'm thinking, whoa, so humanity has hope, because there's magic coming through this creativity, and we could say, well, 100 or 200 years ago, we had the Beethovens, the Bach, the Tchaikovsky. There always was these elements of creative magic. Yes, we did have those, but at the same time, we didn't have the oppressive culture industry with 90% rubbish music bombarding us. So even now, that's coming up as this kind of what I call a distraction. The magic's still coming through, and I think it's coming more through. One of the reasons why I think it's coming more through, Carolyn, is because before, creative artists had to be represented by the industry to get exposure, to be able to put a record out, or to be able to put on a theater show, or to be able to have a book. You needed an industry behind you to represent you. And because of what's been going on, and because of people losing faith in these industries, and because the industry being more and more corrupt, we've gone decentralized. Creative artists have gone back to the cottage industry style, doing it themselves, publishing themselves, putting out their music themselves on their own label. And so this decentralization is basically, I think, taking creativity back to the people and away from these control industries. And I think that is allowing magic to be more dispersed and more prevalent.
Right. And you have the web. So, I can hear an Icelandic musician who I otherwise would have no access to. And they're, these young people are so brilliant, and there are so many of them, and they now have a way of being seen and heard. And they're doing it. I mean, they're so gifted that I'm in awe of the level of talent and ability that is out there.
And perhaps, this is all tied into these kind of fringe anomalies we've been talking about, because I think we need to go to a decentralized model of understanding, that consciousness is working through a kind of field decentralized way, not just a product of the brain, which is a top-down model. Everything before has been a top-down model, a hierarchical model. And I think that's why everything has to fit into this consensus narrative. It's a top-down model, physicality. Paranormal phenomena breaks that model. And when it collapses it, it's like, everything's on offer, everything's potential. You're more open to possibilities, because this paradigm of this narrative, which has been constraining our consciousness, our thinking patterns, starts to break down. And I think this breakdown can be seen on an energetic side, where synchronicities come through and paranormal phenomena come through, on a thinking pattern side, where our consciousness is reaching into new realms and new possibilities, and on a physical side, this top-down hierarchical structure is collapsing through our systems and our structures. So I think we're seeing it on all these different levels now. Paranormal phenomena is just one aspect of that.
Right. And there are crop circles. Just in case you need proof, there are crop circles. People have taken their pictures. People have flown over them and seen them. It's not something that happens in the night to one person. Everybody knows about it. And then the question is, how many people won't believe that what they're seeing is real? And I think that's where we are, is that more and more, well, especially as the young ones grow up, will take it as real, even if grandparents can't see it that way.
And not only to see it and to accept it, but to speak about it. That's the next stage.
Right.
Because people may believe it or may accept it internally, but they may be afraid to speak their truth, because you say the narrative will close them down. So, but and maybe again, this censorship on speaking your truth, which is going on at the moment, could be another trigger to create the contrary. People deciding to speak their truth more as a way to break out of this repression. Everything's a trigger for something else. So maybe we need more people to be speaking openly, saying these once paranormal phenomena are not paranormal, they're just a different aspect of the normal reality.
Right. And so, I'm putting back into the picture these young people who are considered on the spectrum and who don't fit in a variety of ways and at a variety of levels into what the norm is that's happening around them. And they feel crazy, but there are more and more of them. And so I presume, I don't know, I'm not inside that world, but hopefully they have one another and speak the language with one another and don't need to be destructive, because that's one of the ways that they respond to the gifts that they have, is that they destroy things and hurt people. So I don't know what I'm talking about, but that we are making a shift on the level of consciousness, that I'm sure.
Yeah.
And then how to do it effectively and well, that's the question.
Well, conversation is a part of it, because, as you say, if someone is in a small town or somewhere and they don't feel anyone else will recognize their experience, what they're speaking about, that's why more and more people are going online and looking for other connections, because they're looking for like-minded people that they can share their experiences. So I think it's all about having conversations now and having the courage to speak your truth in the conversation. So other people will say, yeah, I wanted to say that, but I didn't want to say it, but now I have the courage to say it because other people are saying it.
Right.
So it's a time to show your movie again, Carolyn, of the Crop Circles. And I wasn't aware of that book, and it must have been a while, many decades since it was published, and your book on synchronicities. Are these books available for people to get hold of now?
Not in a store, I don't think. I will do. They're just chapbooks. They're to be sent like a greeting card almost. And I was trying to introduce these subjects to my own world. I will send you a copy of each one.
Well, that's very kind of you. I wasn't thinking about me. I was thinking about anyone listening, if they could go online and find these pamphlets or these.
They can try. There may still be copies of them around. I don't know, but I do want to send you a copy of each of them. I can do it in a greeting card, because they're deliberately very small. because nobody was speaking that language at the time.
Mhm. Or maybe it's time to make them available, put them online as a PDF or something for people to read as well. Just an idea.
I mean, that's no reason why not to. Yeah, I think that they're pretty good, and they say it all pretty concisely. And maybe I'll even do an extra PS of 30 years later.
Maybe you should. But to do a kind of update or a new introduction to them, because the conversation is coming around again, and so Carolyn, thank you for again this magical conversation, and I think it is time to always make your material available for people, because you say the right time is always a different time for different people.
That's true. That is really true.
So we'll try to work on that to make sure that you have your work available for the new generation to appreciate. And I've appreciated the conversation. So thank you very much, Carolyn, and we'll keep the magic going.
We'll keep the magic going, and thank you. Yeah, this is so much fun.